about these middle class rate. Anyone having any question on this topic?
No, Shrikant.
No, Srikant.
Okay then. So within these test classes, right, we are having a few more so test classes. We are going to use a few more annotations. So those annotations is basically we are going to use a test visible at the rate test visible. So these test visible we cannot use in our test classes. What we can do, we are going to use in our Apex classes. For example, few of the methods we are going to define as a private like this. Private access specifier. So if you would like to access these private methods inside the test classes, so directly it is not possible. Then what we are going to do, we are going to write before the class. So we are going to use a test visible, test visible. So these annotation we need to write it before our method name. Okay, so in the case of like RI enabled, we cannot use private, but in some classes, right, we are going to write some private methods. So if you would like to cover those private methods inside the test class, then what we can do, we need to use at the rate test visible annotation before our method name. At the rate test visible annotation before our method name. So apart from that, remaining thing or remaining all are same only. So only we are going to use at the rate text visible annotation before our method name. So that one thing we need to do. So the next thing here it is within this class, what we are going to do, we are going to use a few more annotations. Those are start test and then stop test. We are going to use start test and then stop test. So start test as well as a stop test. We are going to use stop test. Okay. So what is this start test and then what is this stop test? So if you're implementing test classes for batch apex, okay, so if you're implementing test classes for like a batch apex, or if you're like implementing a test class for like schedule apex or web services, okay, so then you need to use these start test as well as stop test keywords in your test classes. Okay, so we are going to like use this start test and top test when it is required, in the sense, for example, you are writing multiple DML statements inside these test method. For example, I am going to create account records, I am going to create contact records, I am going to create opportunity records. So similar way, I am going to create multiple object records within this test class, within this within this test method. So at the time, what happened, right? It will throw an exception. The exception is basically if you're like working with the multiple objects and then multiple things inside the same method, then it is going to consider as a single transaction. Then, as per the like governor limit policy, it is going to throw an governor limit issue. So to avoid this issue, what you can do, you need to use these test dot start test and then test dot stop test. You need to use it. So test dot start test as well as test dot stop test. You need to use it. So if we are like using these statements, right, it is going to reset the governor limit for these statements. Whatever the statements you have written inside these test dot start test and test dot stop test, it is going to reset the governor limits. For example, I'm like using these test dot start test and then test dot stop test here. Okay, so then automatically what happened, right? Whatever the statements like you have written outside the test dot start test and then test dot stop test, it is going to have different governor limits, and whatever the statements you have written inside these test dot start test and test dot stop test, it is going to have fresh governor limits. For example, here it is reaching the 100 DML statements. Okay, and 9,000 records. So then if you go with these statement, right, it is going to have like a fresh limits. It is going to count from zero onwards. Okay, so when your test class having a governor limit issue, okay, so then you can use these statements, test dot start test and then test dot stop test. It is going to reset your governor limits. Okay, so these statement we need to remember. Okay, so what is the use of tester start test and tester stop test in sense? It is going to reset your governor limits. Whatever the statements you have written inside these tester start test and then tester stop test, it is having fresh governor limits. So these tester start test and tester stop test can we use multiple times. So for single method, you can use only one. Okay, so in the case of like this method, you can use only once, and in the case of like second method, so within the second method, you can use one more time. Okay, so depending upon like these methods what we are having, depending upon these methods what we are having, it is going to like use it is going to use like only once. So whatever the method we are having, so within the method we can use only once. In the case of like second method, you can use only once. So if you are having four methods, you can use only four times. So for method, you can use only one time. Okay, so in the case of if you are calling any of the batch apex or if you're calling any of this schedule apex, so those batch apex and schedule apex, you need to initiate only within these test dot start test and then test dot stop test only. So if you would like to write test classes for your like a batch apex or schedule apex, then you need to use these test dot start test and then test dot stop test only. Okay, so that is mandate for our batch apex schedule apex test classes. Okay, so these statements you can use not only for our like batch classes. If you feel your apex class or like your test class, it is going to hit the governor limit, then what you can do, you can separate some transactions, you can separate some statements, and you can use these tester start test and tester stop test. So that you are able to like you are able to get the fresh corner limits, and you will perform the transaction without having any issues. Okay, so like this, these tester stop test and tester stop test, we can use it. Okay, any question on this topic? Test
No,
visible
Shrikant.
or
Clear.
like start test
No,
stop
Shrikant,
test?
clear. Clear.
Okay, so these three are like mandate things in our test classes. So sometimes we are going to create any user in our test methods, and you need to like create a setup data as well. But generally what happen, right, when you are like when you are creating a user as well as these setup records in a single method, so as per the setup objects and non-setup objects process, you will get a mixed DML exception. Okay, for example, if you create account records, if you create like users within the same method, then you will get a mixed DML exception. So to avoid that mixed DML exception, what you need to do? So first, you are going to create the user. You are going to create the user. So once you are done with user creation, then after what we can do, we can use like a system dot run as. You need to use system dot run as. So you can use this statement, and then whatever the user you have created, you can use that user, or you can go with your current user info dot get user ID. With the help of that one, you are able to user info dot get user. Sorry. So So with the help of this one, we are going to like perform the non-setup objects in within these system dot run as user. Within this system dot run as user. So generally, what we are going to do when you are like trying to create an user object as well as our say account object, account records, and all those things, right? Then what you can do, you can create whatever the user you want here, and then you can get the one of the user with the help of like software. Whatever the user you are getting, right, the username you can mention here, so that you are able to avoid mixed DML exception in our test classes. Okay, so these are the things only we are going to work in our test classes. Apart from that, there is no complex topic in these test classes. Only what you need to use these utility class, and you need to prepare the test setup data. You need to prepare the test setup data. So when you are like working with the like Apex classes, when you are like working with test classes, you should completely aware of your Apex class. If you are able to aware, then you can prepare the test data easily. Then you can prepare test data easily. So here, what you can do, you can like use the statement like whatever the records you are going to create it, you can simply create it, and then you can use the statement called your apex class dot method. So if you would like to, if you have like multiple methods of your apex class, each and every method depending upon the data, you can like call one by one. Depending upon the data, you can call one by one. So like this, we can prepare these test classes. Apart from that, there is no other topics in these test classes. Test classes only they are going to ask you questions like what is the code coverage. So minimum code coverage for your Apex classes, minimum code coverage for your like trigger, and then so they are going to ask you best practices. So what is the best practice in sense? So we need to create the utility class, and whatever the records we are going to use it, so everything we need to prepare within this utility class only, within this utility class only. Okay, so and then wherever it is required, you can access outside this class. Wherever it is required, you can access outside this class. So these things we need to remember. Okay, so any questions so far in our test classes?
Shrikant, can you explain that system.run as once again?
Yeah. So system dot run as generally what we're going to use in the sense, sometimes we are going to run our code in a specific user format. We are going to run our code in specific user format. At the time, whatever the user format do you want to execute it, whatever the user context do you want to execute it, you need to query the corresponding user here. So then after, so you can use user u equal to, you can like query the select id from a user. So whatever the condition you are having, you can apply the condition and then give the limit one. So then after you simply provide like a username here, whatever the user, you can simply provide like this. Then automatically what happened, right, it is going to execute within this user mode. Sometimes you need to like verify your Apex class in user mode. So that means you need to verify whether that user having access or not, or whether the user having an like data or not. So those all things if you would like to verify, then you need to run your test class in user mode. So at the time, you can query the user, and you are going to use the system that run as user. So along with that, if you're getting in a mixed DML exception, sometimes you need to create account records as well as your user records as well. So if you're working for like a community cloud, if you're working for community cloud, okay, so within this community cloud, right, what you can do, you need to create a account record, contact record, as well as a user record. So in that scenario, right, what you can do, first you can create the user record, then after you can query the other user, and then you are going to use system.run as, system.run as, and then you can creating whatever the account records, all other records you can create within these system.run as. So otherwise, if you're creating user record as well as account record, you will get a mixed DML exception. So because of that, we are going to create user record outside of system.run as, and you can create account records or like whatever the non-setup object records you can create inside these system.run as, so that you can avoid the mixed DML exception.
Okay, got it.
Any other question from anyone?
No, Srikanth.
Okay. So yeah. Any question?
No, Srikanth, clear.
So if you're good, then we can proceed with the other topic. So the topic is basically we can go with the deployments. So in test classes wise, right? They are going to ask you about like these questions only.
This is a
So what is a test start test and then test stop test? Okay, and then what is the test setup and what are the best practices you are following? And the next thing is in the case of like private methods, how we are going to
arrange
use it.
okay. చేయలే ఇక్కడ
Okay, if you're not speaking, please put on mute.
ముడతలు పడింది ఒకటి ఓకే
Okay, so what are the like test setup, and then in the case of like private methods, how we are going to call. So those things they are going to ask you. So sometimes what happen, right? So in our classes, we are going to like execute these methods. So if ACC not equal to null, but still, do you want to execute? Do you want to execute your test classes? Then what we are going to do? We are going to use a test dot is running test. So test dot is a running test. Okay, so this statement we are going to use it. So what is this statement in the sense? For example, in your test classes, in your FS class, if any of the statement that may not cover part of our test classes code coverage, so directly it may not cover. Then what you can do? You can use these dot test dot is running test. So if you're using this statement, right, then automatically what happened? It is going to like when you are like executing test classes at the time it is going to execute this code as well. So by default you will get like a true if you're executing from the test classes. So generally in some situations few of the code that you need to specifically write for test classes, and a few of the lines you are going to like execute without test classes. In the case of like a email message, in the case of email message, so those email message code you cannot write it inside the test classes. What you can do, you need to write not of test dot is running test. If you would like to implement any of the email message in your Apex classes, so those email message code you cannot execute inside the test classes. What you can do, you need to exclude those lines from our test class execution. For example, you have written one method like this. You have written one method like this. Okay, public static void. So some test method, some test data method. Okay, so like this, I'm preparing one method. So here, what I'm going to do, I'm preparing like a email message. So em equal to some like a new email message. So I'm preparing this data. I'm preparing like this data. So here I'm going to dispatch some email. So these email message you cannot invoke from our test classes. So in the case of if you're calling this method, then automatically what happened, right? It is going to execute these email message as well. So then you will get an exception. So to avoid such kind of things, what you can do, we are going to use if test dot not is running test dot not is running test. Okay, so if you are using this statement, right, then automatically what happen, it won't execute when you are like executing test classes, whatever the lines you have written inside these statement, right, it won't execute it. Okay, so when you are like executing from the system, when you are like executing from the like Apex class, it will work. But if you are running test classes, at the time the statement it won't work it. Okay, whatever the code you have written inside this if condition, it won't work. Okay, so why we need to write this statement in the sense, sometimes we are like using email message or like some other lines that you cannot write test classes for those lines of code. Okay, so if you have such kind of lines, then what you can do, you can like exclude in our Apex classes with the help of the statement, not of test.isRunningTest, not of test.isRunningTest. So similar way, in some situations, if any of the if condition you are not able to cover, you are not able to cover with our test data, then what you can do, you are going to use test.isRunningTest. So that automatically what happened, right? When irrespective of like these if condition value, irrespective of these if condition value, if you're like executing from the test classes, by default it is going to give the true value, so that it is going to execute the lines, whatever the lines you have implemented here, whatever the lines you have implemented here. So in these kind of like scenarios, right, in these kind of scenarios, we can use this test dot is running test, this test dot is running test. Okay, so it is like a very rare cases we are going to use test.is running test, but it is not a best practice to use inside our Apex classes. Only in the case of like email message you need to use this one, but you cannot like add a test.is running test inside the if conditions like this. Okay, so it's not a best practice. In the case of like email message, you can use this statement so without any issues, but in the case of like if conditions, you should like cover with the help of like our test setup data only. So you cannot use test dot is running test in our test classes. But if it is really required, so in the case of like urgent basis, it is in a workaround to cover the code coverage. Okay, so you may not like implement a acc not equal to null statement. Then what you can do, you can simply go with test dot is running test. So then automatically whatever the code you have written inside this if condition, it is going to cover. Okay, so any question on this?
No, Shrikant.
So generally, if you're executing your Apex classes, it is going to execute in a system mode. Okay, so when you are running, when you are like running test classes, if you call this method, if you call this method from your test classes, then automatically what happen? It is going to like execute in a test context mode. Okay, so what if you would like to execute any statements, if you would like to execute any statements, or if you would like to exclude any statements when you are running the test classes. For example, I am like using this one, I am going to click on run test, I am going to click on run test. So when you click on run test, right, so here what happened, while executing, if you would like to cover any of the statement, or if you don't want to cover any of the statement, with the help of these things you are able to cover it. For example, if I don't want execute this line of code, if I don't want to execute this line of code when I am initiating a test process, okay, when I'm executing test classes, I don't want to execute this line of code, then what you can do, you need to use a statement called if not of test dot is running test, not of test dot is running test. That means when you are like executing test classes, it is going to give the false value, so that it won't, whatever the statement you have written here, right, it won't execute it. So why you cannot execute this statement? In the sense, as per the Salesforce documentation, few of the functionalities that you cannot write, that you cannot add it in test classes. So one of the functionality is email message. So in the case of if you're implementing email message inside your Apex classes, you cannot write test classes for that. Okay, but within this method, you have like other lines, right? Maybe you can like define some lines of code here. So you need to cover other lines, but you need to skip for this one. So if you would like to skip, then what you can do, you need to use not of test dot is running test, so that these lines you are able to skip it. Okay, any more questions from anyone? Okay, Any questions?
No, Shrikant, clear.
Okay then. So I think you are aware of like the code coverage part, right? So the minimum code coverage and then maximum code coverage, and so the default code coverage as well. Any question on this topic?
No, Shrikant, it's clear.
Okay then.
Shrikant, it's clear.
Then we can go for deployment.
Shrikant,
So yeah,
can we write the test classes for integration?
yeah, we can write it. We need to prepare the mock response for that, and then you can use it in our test classes. So generally, if you are like implementing test classes for integration, what you need to do, you need to prepare the mock response. Okay, so if you're invoking an integration call out, then it is going to provide you response, right? Response in JSON format. So whatever the format of JSON you are getting, similar way you need to prepare the mock response. Okay, so that you are able to get the code coverage. You can write the test classes for the integration, but you need to prepare the mock response for that. If someone asking in your interview, you can explain to them.
Okay.
Okay. So now we'll go with like this deployment. So within the deployment, what you are going to do, you are going to prepare your changes, and then you can deploy your changes from a sandbox to the another sandbox, or like a sandbox to the production. You are going to deploy it. Okay, so for this deployment, we are having like a multiple tools available. So as per the like a Salesforce, by default they are providing a concept called chain set. By default, they are providing a concept called chain set. So apart from this chain set, we are having multiple other tools. So VS Code and like Git. Okay, so we are going to use Git, and like they are having like so multiple tools available like auto rabbit, so quick deploy. So some people they are going to use a CI/CD pipeline. Okay, some people they are going to
Copado
use
also,
a
yes.
Copado. Okay, so depending upon a client budget, depending upon a client requirement, they are going to use different tools. Okay, so all these are like paid tools. All these are paid tools. So if you would like to use Chainset is free of cost, and by default it is provided by Salesforce. Okay, so if you would like to go with if you would like to go with any of these tool, you need to pay to the corresponding tool license. Okay, so depending upon the client and then their budget, they are going to like use different tools. They are going to use different tools. So the thing here it is, if I'm using like a chain set, so as per like our scenarios, we can go with like a chain set, and you have like only 3 years of experience, right? So that you can like explain, I'm having a knowledge of chain set only, so my client is not using any other tools. You can mention like that. Okay, so how we are going to like deploy our changes by using chain set. So when we go for like these deployment, right? So we are having like a inbound chain set and then a outbound chain set. Inbound chain set and then a outbound chain set. Okay, so these two are available in our Salesforce. So what is this inbound chain set and then what is this outbound chain set in the sense? So if you are like a log into our Salesforce, if you're like a log into our Salesforce. So here you are able to get the like a chain set options. You are able to get the chain set, but in our developer edition, it's not provided. But if you go with any of the paid versions, any of the paid version, you are able to get the these inbound and then outbound chain set here. So if I go with deployment, if I go with deployment settings, okay. So from our side, we don't have any like options available. Because why? Because it is like developer edition, right? So for the developer edition, Salesforce not allowing us to perform the change set option. But if you go with any paid version, you are able to get the these deployment option. Okay, so within this deployment, what you are going to do, you can deploy your changes from one sandbox to the another sandbox with the help of these inbound chain set and then outbound chain set. So in the case of if I would like to deploy from my dev sandbox dev sandbox dev sandbox to I'm going to like deploy to the I'm going to deploy to the some QA sandbox. QA sandbox. Dev sandbox to the QA sandbox or dev sandbox to the production, whatever it is. Okay. So if you're like trying to deploy it, then what you can do, you need to create a outbound chain set. So from dev sandbox side, what you need to do, we need to follow these steps. Okay. So we need to follow these steps in dev sandbox side. First, you need to create the outbound chain set. Outbound chain set. Okay. So once you created, then after you can add a metadata components. Add metadata components. So metadata in the sense, so if you're like deploying custom fields, or if you're deploying like custom object, if you're deploying like Apex classes, Apex stickers, so whatever you have created, so far we have implemented, right? In our admin topics and our development topics, whatever you have created, you can deploy all the things with the help of these changes only, either fields, validation rules, page layouts, and then these workflows, email alerts, field updates, and then outbound messages. So process builder, and then approval process, flows, so Apex classes, Apex triggers, and then Lightning RA components, Visual Post pages, Lightning Web components. So everything you can add to the chain set. Metadata in sense, so these topics only. So you can add it to the chain set. So once you are done with these chain set, then what you can do, you can add to the like metadata. So then after what you can do, you can upload your chain set to the target org. You can upload your chain set to the target org. Okay, and then and then what you can do in your QA sandbox, that means in your target side, what you need to do, whatever the like chain set you have uploaded, so that is available in our inbound chain set. So you need to go with the inbound chain set. Inbound chain set. So you can like get the these corresponding chain set. So then after validate your chain set, validate your inbound chain set, validate inbound chain set. Okay, and then so you can deploy your inbound chain set. Okay, so these are the steps we need to follow when you are like deploying your changes from sandbox to the like any other environment, or like one sandbox to the one another sandbox, or like a sandbox to the production. So you need to follow these steps. Okay, so when you are like deploying, first of all you need to verify a deployment connection. You need to verify deployment connection. So if you go with like a deployment settings in your quick find, you are able to get the deployment settings, right? So similar way, in the case of in your real time environment, what you can do, first of all, you need to like verify deployment settings. For example, I am trying to upload from dev sandbox to the QA sandbox. Then what you need to do, in your dev sandbox, go to the dev sandbox, and then verify deployment settings. Verify deployment settings, whether you are able to upload it or not. Okay, so if you'd like to verify, so even if you're like searching it in Google, right, you are able to get the some images. So deployment settings in chain set. Okay, so if you can like go with these videos, you are able to get this some idea. So how these deployment settings is available. So deployment settings in the sense, like these QA arc that should accept change it from dev arc. So if you are like trying to deploy from dev to the QA, then you can log into the QA sandbox, and then you can go to the deployment settings. So if you go to the deployment settings, right, you can see dev sandbox name. Go to the dev sandbox name, and then you need to like accept the inbound change set checkbox. You need to accept the inbound change set checkbox, so that you can upload from a dev sandbox to the QA sandbox. If you're not enabling these checkbox, you cannot deploy it. If you're not enabling these checkbox, you cannot deploy it. So that's why what you can do, whenever you are like trying to deploy it, whenever you are trying to deploy your changes from one sandbox to the another sandbox, then first you need to verify deployment settings. Okay, so if it is already enabled, then no need to do anything. So if it is not enabled, then what you can do, uh, you can simply go to the target arc. Okay, if I like uploading from dev to QA, then you can log into the QA, and within the QA you need to go to the deployment setting, and accept the inbound change set, accept the inbound change set of so and so org. If you're able to click on that one, then you can get these options. So if you see here, right, deployment connection setting, you can see here, you can get the option like this: allow inbound changes. We need to enable the checkbox, and then click on save. We need to enable the checkbox, and then click on save, so that you are able to upload your change set from your dev sandbox to the QA sandbox. So like this, when you are like trying to deploy your change set from one arc to the another arc, so sometimes what happen, right, these deployment settings may not be enabled by anyone. Okay, so at the time what you can do, you can go to the target arc, and then enable this deployment setting. If you enable, then only you can upload to the target arc. Okay, so once you are able to upload, then these steps are coming to picture. Okay, so once you are like enable the setting, then these steps are coming to picture. Dev sandbox, within the dev sandbox, we can go with like a outbound chain set, and then and then you can create the outbound chain set. So once you create the outbound chain set, right, so the chain set is available like this. Okay, so the chain set is available like this. So here you can add the not like this. So the chain set, yeah. So outbound chain set by default available like this. So the chain set, you can go with these option. So here this org, first contact, click on new. So then after, you are able to get the you can create the chain set like this. So within the chain set, you can add the components here. So simply click on add, and then you can choose the whatever type you want. Okay, in the case of like custom field, or in the case of like apex classes, or like apex trigger, or custom object, whatever you want, you can choose this one. So when you click on add, so then you are able to get the list here. You are able to get the list here. So the list is basically, okay, so I will showcase it here. So here, yeah, by default, you are able to get it like this. When you click on like add, then you are able to get the drop down like this. So here, what type of metadata you need to add it. So if I would like to add the Apex classes, then you need to select the Apex class here. Then you need to select the Apex class here. So if I go with this statement, yeah. So they are providing step-by-step procedure here. Within this documentation, they are providing step-by-step procedure here. So what you need to do in your target arc, go to the deployment setting. So in the deployment setting, you can find the your sandbox name. You can find the your sandbox name. So within the sandbox name, if you click on it, then it is going to open like this, and then you can click on edit. You can click on edit. So then after you can enable the checkbox and then save it. So once you are done, then you can go to the your sandbox. So here you can create the your change set like this, new change set, and then you can provide one name to your change set. Then after simply create it. So once you are done with this one, then after what you can do, you can go to the add your components. So if I go with this add option, so if I go with the add option, so if I'm going to like this add option, then what you can do, you are able to navigate to this screen. So here, whatever the data do you want to add, whatever the components do you want to add, you can select a specific type here. So Apex classes, and then whatever the Apex trigger or LWC components or custom fields, custom objects, whatever do you want to add, you can select here. So once you are done with these things, so here if you're able to specify the type, so that you can add your components to the change set. So once you are able to add the change set, then you can upload your change set from your sandbox to the upper arg, from your sandbox to the target arg. When you click on upload option, you are able to get the list of options available here. You need to select the target sandbox name. You need to select the target sandbox name. If you would like to deploy it, if you would like to upload to the QA arc, or if you would like to upload to the production arc, so where do you want to upload your change set, you need to select here, and then click on upload again, so that you are able to upload your change set from your sandbox, from your sandbox. So once you are able to upload these change set, that is available in our target arg as a inbound change set, as a inbound change set. Okay, so once you are able to upload, so those corresponding chain set available in our inbound chain set, available in our target are as a inbound chain set. So if I go with this QA sandbox, I need to navigate to the inbound chain set. If I'm navigating to the inbound chain set, you are able to get your chain set name here. Okay, so here you can see option called validate, deploy, and then delete. So what you need to do, first you need to validate it. So then after you can deploy this change set. So if you go with these validation, right, when you click on like validate, then you are able to get the four options available here. So default, run local test, run all test, run specified test. So these four options available. Okay, so if you are using like a default, then what will happen in the case of if you're using run select, run local test, then what will happen? So run all test, what will happen? So run specified test, then what will happen? So these are the main things we need to remember here. So in this deployment, these four things are main things we need to remember. So when I am choosing default, for example, in my chain set, I have added like a Apex class, Apex class, and some custom fields. Okay, some configuration items. Okay, custom fields, and then custom objects. So I have added all these things. So when you are validating this change set, when you are validating this change set. Please listen carefully. So in your change set, you are having Apex clauses and then custom fields and then custom objects. And you have chosen an option called default. You have chosen an option called default. Then what will happen, right? It is going to execute. It is going to execute all the test classes. All the test classes available in your org. Okay, if you're using default option, then it is going to execute all the test classes available in your org. For example, you have like a 150 test classes. It is going to execute all 150 test classes in your org. Okay, but in the case of I am like trying to upload the change set. Within the change set, I am having like a custom field, custom objects, VF page, and RA component, some flows, whatever the like configuration items, except Apex class, except Apex class. So remaining all, if you have within the change set, remaining all within the change set. So then in that case, if you are using a default option, then no test classes will be executed. No test classes will be executed here. So in the case of if your change set contain at least one test class, at least one Apex class, okay. If your change set contain at least one Apex class, if you're choosing a default option, then it is going to execute all the test classes available within your org. It is going to execute all the test classes available within your org. But in the case of if your change set is not having any of the Apex classes, then it won't execute any test class. It won't execute any test class. Okay, so in the case of if you're choosing these run local test option, if you're choosing run local test option, then what will happen, right? So whether your change is having like a, whether your change has having a Apex class or not, by default it is going to execute the local test classes. It is going to execute the local test classes. So what is this local test class in the sense? So if you purchase in a mobile, if you purchase in a mobile, then you are going to install the apps. You are going to install the apps. So by default, your mobile they will provide some apps. They will provide some apps. So whatever the apps you have installed, that is on top of your mobile OS, on top of your mobile features. Okay, so whatever the apps you have installed, that is on top of your like mobile apps. So in similar way in our Salesforce also, they we are having some apps available, that is available in our app exchange. So that is available in our app exchange. So similar way in our Apple phone we have like iStore, like Apple Store, and in our Google, in our like Android phones, we are having like a Play Store. So within the Play Store, whatever the app you want, you can search it and then you can install in our mobile. So similar way in our Salesforce also, we have an app exchange. We have an app exchange available here. So if I go with this one, so here we have an app exchange. So we have an app exchange marketplace. So within this Apex marketplace, right? Already some features already implemented, that is available for ready to use. So that is available for ready to use. So if you see here, right, quality assurance scorecards, and then Springboard for Salesforce, Titan Forms. So like this survey. So all AI productivity platforms. So we are having like a multiple tools, multiple applications already built and then available for ready to usage. Available for ready to usage. So these these all we called as packages. We called as packages. So if you installed any one of these feature, if you installed any one of these package, okay, so then what happened, right? So then what happened, right? It is going to consider as external test classes for these app exchange as well, it is having apex classes and then test classes available. If I installed these package, right, then these package contain the required objects, fields, and then apex classes, test classes, everything available inside this package. When I install this one, then by default it is going to create in our org. Okay, so for these Apex classes, it is having its own test classes. So these test classes, if you are using the statement called run local test. So if you are using the statement called run local test, that means it is going to exclude test classes installed by packages. Test classes for installed by packages. Okay, apart from that, whatever the other test classes, it is going to execute it. Whatever the other test classes, it is going to execute it. In the case of if I'm using a run all test, in the case of if I'm using run all test, then automatically what happen, right? It is going to execute all the test classes irrespective of the whether it is a package test class or like a local test class, whatever it may be, it is going to execute it. So irrespective of your chain set, irrespective of your chain set, that means your chain set is having like a your chain set is having like a Apex class or not. If your chain set is having Apex class or not, by default it is going to execute all the test classes available in your org. In the case of if I'm using run local test, so it is going to exclude the package related test classes, and what are the test classes created by our users, it is going to execute it. And in the case of like a default, depending upon your change set components, so if your change set is having Apex classes, then it is going to execute then it is going to execute like your all the test classes. If your child set is not having Apex class, then it won't execute anything. So these things we need to remember. And the final thing, run local test. So run specified test. So these run specified test is basically, for example, you are like trying to deploy only one Apex class. But if you're like trying to deploy only one Apex class, you need to like if you go with any one of these options, it will take so much of time. Why? Because it is going to execute all the test classes available in your org. Maybe your org having 100 classes or like 200 classes, it will take like so much of time. It will take too much time. So to avoid such kind of things, we are going to use run specified test. We are going to use run specified test. So when you go with these run specified test, right? If you choose this option, then you are able to get one box here. If I'm choosing this option, then automatically you are able to get the one option here. So here, whatever the test class associated with your like Apex class that you are deploying, you need to mention here. So if you are like using this option, it is going to execute only one test class. For example, you are deploying four classes. So then four classes related Apex test class names, you need to specify within this description box with comma separated. Okay, so then automatically it is going to execute only four test classes, and in the case of if it is success, then it is going to deploy. It is going to give the success. Okay, so like this we can specify this option. And so once you are done with this validation, you will get a message called validate success as kind of message available. So once you got the validate success message, then you can use an option called deploy. So with the help of like these deploy, you can deploy your changes to the corresponding org. So these are the steps we need to follow. When you are like deploying your changes, your like change set from one sandbox to the another sandbox, or like from a sandbox to the production. So for everything it is same only. If you're like deploying from a sandbox to sandbox, or like if you're deploying from a sandbox to production, so every time you are going to follow the same approach only. Okay, so here we need to remember what is these deployment options, validation options available. So if you're using default, then what will happen? If you're using like a run all test, then what will happen? If you're using a run specified test, then what will happen?
Okay, so these things we can like use this one. Any question? Any questions so far?
No, Shrikant. Understood.
Any question from anyone? Okay, if you're like if you able to practice this one, right? So then only you are able to get off this one. Okay, so but if even if you go with the some search in Google, right, you are able to uh, you are able to get this documentation. So step by step procedure available, so you can like simply follow this one. It's not a complex thing. Okay, we just need to understand the procedure, that's it.
Okay, Shrikant. We'll practice.
Okay, yep. So for deployment, we don't have any best practices. Okay. So generally, we are going to use validation, and depending upon the components you are going to deploy. So based on that, we can use a run local test, or like a run all test, or run specified test, or like a default. We're going to with those options. Okay. So any more questions from anyone?
No, Shrikant.
Okay, so these deployment options, as I mentioned, when you were like deploying, right? So the code coverage part. Okay, so just now we discussed, right? These 1%, and then these percentage that should be having more than 70%. So if you are like using a run specified test, if you're using run specified test at the time, your code coverage should be more than 70%. Whatever the classes you are deploying, for those classes, code coverage should be more. Each and every class code coverage should be more than 75. Then only you are able to deploy if you are using run specified test. Okay, so if you are like using run specified test, you cannot deploy with the 0% code coverage. Okay, if you go with the default or like run local test, run all test, so you go with that option with 0% code coverage, you can deploy Apex class. Why? Because at the time it is going to verify our code coverage. Okay, so what is the R code coverage in sense? So if you go with our test classes, you can see that option here. So if you go with like a test, you are able to see like a overall code coverage. So it is going to evaluate how many classes available, and then code coverage of all these classes. So if your R code coverage is more than 70%, if your R code coverage is more than 70%, then you can deploy any of the Apex class without code coverage. Okay, but those option is available uh, only for these default and run local test, run all test, for these options only. If I go with run specified test, so whatever the class you are deploying, for that class the code coverage should be more than 75%. So these steps we need to remember. Okay, and here once you are able to upload your change set from one sandbox to the another sandbox, your change set will be locked. Your change set will be locked. Okay, so if you would like to create a if you would like to add any changes, then what you can do, you can clone your change set, and then you can re-upload one more change set. Okay, until you are not deploying your change set in a target arc, your changes won't available for testing, or like won't available for usage. So for example, I have uploaded one change set from dev sandbox to the QA sandbox. Okay, so dev sandbox to the QA sandbox. So then what happened, right? So then what happened, right? So these changes that won't be reflect in our target arc. So once the changes is reflected, if you would like to reflect your changes, then you need to deploy. So once you deploy, then only your changes will be reflected in our target arc. Otherwise, it won't be reflect. Okay. So once you deploy, then only your changes is available for usage. Okay. So any questions so far from anyone?
No, Shrikant, understood.
Okay, so try to like go with any video or like documentation, so you will get like some idea. Okay, so then you can go with like test class as well. Okay, so just prepare some test classes from your end, and then we'll see. So this is for our deployment as well as these test classes. So deployment, we just like follow these option. Where in the case of like a source arc, what you need to do, in the case of like target arc, what you need to do. So source arc, prepare the chain set and then upload it, and target arc, receive the chain set in inbound chain set, and then validate your chain set, then deploy your chain set. Okay, so these things you need to remember. And while validating, you have like four options available. So default, run local test, run all test, run specified test. So depending upon your requirement, you need to choose any one of these options. So if you are using default, if your change set contains any of the Apex class, then it is going to execute all the Apex classes, all the test classes. So otherwise, it won't execute any of the test classes. By default, it will give the success equal to true. Okay, so in the case of if your Apex class having any of the field, okay, but the field is not available in target arc. For example, you have created one field in your dev sandbox, and you have used the field in your Apex class, and you are like trying to deploy your Apex class from dev sandbox to the QA. But in QA, if you are not creating the field in QA sandbox, then you will get an exception. Okay, so whatever the like dependencies you need to add to the chain set, and then you need to deploy it. Okay, so not only field. So sometimes what happen, right? You are like using your Apex class in some other Apex class, but the Apex class is not available in target arc, so that you will get an exception. So that's why whatever the dependency of your like Apex classes are like not only Apex classes in your like a workflow. If you are referring a field in a workflow, but the field is not available in a target arc, then you will get an exception. So that's why when you are like deploying anything, make sure the dependent things already should be available. Okay, so those things we need to mention.
Okay, Shrikanth, got it.
Okay. Any more questions from anyone? Okay.
No doubt, Shrikant. Yeah.
Okay then. So then we can leave for today. So Monday class, we can go with batch epics. Okay, we try to go with the batch epics, and then LWC we have few pending topics. We can go with those topics once we're done with the batch epics and the shift epics.
Okay, Shrikant. Okay, Shrikant. Thank you.
Thank you, team.
Shrikant,